Hi everyone, I have the pleasure of presenting to you a historic game between two absolute giants of the chess world, both former world champions, and the only game ever played between these two icons. It was played in France in 1989. Before we proceed, please don't forget to smash that thumbs up button and subscribe for more games like this. Playing as white was Mikhail Tal, a name that echoes throughout the annals of chess history as the player known not only as the greatest attacking player of all time, but also for his love of absolute chaos on the chessboard. All he needed was just one single opportunity to attack, and the entire board would ignite and fire. And let's not forget his reputation as a master of mind games with his intense stare and psychological warfare. Playing as white was Vishy Anand. Anand is the absolute best player that the land of over 1 billion people, India, has ever produced. And Anand is the name that has echoed throughout the chess world for decades upon decades because he has cemented his place as a constant presence in the top 10 players in the world since the early 1990s. He barely and briefly stepped out of the top 10 as he finally approached closer to the age of 50. Anand is known for his lightning-fast play and somehow, at the same time, for his ability for deep calculation. This was the battle of the generations, and I cannot overemphasize how historic this game was. I was not there to watch it live, but I do have a completely accurate and understated mental image and description of the event. As the players sat down to face off, the air crackled with tension. It was like the very fabric of time and space was at stake. When the final move was made, the ground shook and lightning seemed to flash in the distance. It was like we were all holding our breath, waiting to see if the universe would survive. Thankfully it did, though just barely. Alright, now let's look at the game. Tal opened the game with c4, the English opening, an opening that is highly respected and quite transpositional. Anand responded with c5, the symmetrical English, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight d4. Anand breaks the principle that you should not move the same piece twice in the opening, but he does so with a specific idea in mind. It ultimately comes down to control over the d4 square. Certainly the black knight occupying that square prevents white from playing d4, but the idea is that black is putting white in a position to have to play e3 to kick the knight away. It goes without say that white playing knight takes d4 is no good, because after c takes d4, black strengthens his center and prevents white's c3 knight from occupying its most ideal square, which is c3 itself. So after e3, black will play knight takes f3, check, and white will have to capture with the queen. Queen takes f3. In that position, black has forced white to bring out his queen too early, and will have ideas of fighting for d4 using the g8 knight, as we will see in this game. Tal indeed played e3, attacking the knight. Knight takes f3 check, queen takes f3, g6, the standard move in this position, to fianchetto the dark squared bishop. Tal responded with b3, but why can't white simply play d4 here instead? Black would respond with bishop g7, and often it results in tripled pawns for white, for example after bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and d takes c5. The biggest issue with d4 is ultimately that it leads to many draws, and playing for a draw is not very ambitious for white. b3, bishop g7, bishop b2, d6. Here, Tal decides that the best diagonal for his light square bishop is the long diagonal, so he played g3. Anand, seeing that Tal would no doubt be placing the bishop on g2, placed his rook off of the vulnerable a8 square and played rook b8. Anand is also looking to play the b5 break, but will need help of an additional piece for that. Bishop g2. Now Anand has to decide where to develop the knight, either h6 or f6. Anand decides on h6 and plays knight h6. The idea of developing the knight on h6 is to play knight f5 to fight for the d4 square. Queen d1. Tal was anticipating bishop g4 and is looking to reroute his queen to c2 or c1 or b1. Castle kingside, bishop d2, developing the bishop and preparing for the b5 break, but Tal has other ideas. a4, stopping the b5 break, but at the cost of weakening the b3 pawn. Bishop c6. Tal's light squared bishop was better than Anand's light squared bishop, so Anand decides to go for the trade. d4, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, rook c8. The rook was not doing anything on b8 after the light-squared bishops were exchanged and after a4 was played. Queen d3, trying to improve the position of the queen. However, the queen was at least defending the b3 pawn from d1. Tal should have played d5 instead in order to try to weaken black's e7 pawn. Having played queen d3, Tal allows Anand to exchange on d4 and then play knight f5, and that's exactly what happened. C takes d4, e takes d4, knight f5. Tal needs to do something about the d4 pawn being attacked twice and only defended once, so Tal played d5. Queen b6, attacking the undefended b3 pawn. Tal defends with knight d1, and the bishops come off the board. Bishop takes b2, knight takes b2, and here Anand played a move which slightly weakens his central pawns but opens up lines for his rooks. Anand played e5. Not taking the e pawn here allows Anand to take the d4 outpost and to play f5 to dominate the center. So Tal played d takes c6 en passant, f takes e6, rook a d1. One aspect of this move I simply don't like is that the white knight has absolutely no moves. Rook f6. Anand is getting ready to double the rooks on the f file, but I must say that rook f7 would have been a better move because the rook on f7 has more squares along the 7th rank. Any attack on the e pawn could have been dealt with by pushing that pawn, so e5. It does also create an outpost for the white knight on d5, but the black knight would be able to occupy the newly created outpost on d4 immediately, while it would take some time for the white knight to occupy the d5 outpost. Rook d2, e5, queen d5 check, king g7, queen b5, queen c7. The white king seems potentially more vulnerable to attack for Anand to exchange the queens. c5. The idea is that if d takes c5, white has rook d7 check, and if queen takes c5, which was actually played, white has queen takes b7 check. The strategic problem with white's c pawn being removed and black's b pawn being removed is that this benefits black much more than it does white, because black's c8 rook and less importantly queen go from being on a semi-open file to a completely open file. At the same time, white does not really benefit from the b pawn coming off the board other than the material being even. From here on out, black maintains a strong advantage. Queen takes c5, queen takes b7 check, rook c7, queen d5. Exchanging the queens would be unambitious for black in this position and would get white back into the game, so Anand played queen b4, eyeing the weak b3 pawn. Rook fd1, rook c5, attacking the queen, which now does not have a safe way of defending the b3 pawn. Queen a8. Queen takes b3. Tal will hand Anand a tempo if he plays queen takes a7 here. Let's put that move on the board. So queen takes a7 check, rook f7, attacking the queen, queen a8, rook c2. The knight is being attacked twice. If he tries rook takes c2, we have queen takes c2, and there's no way to defend the b2 knight. Obviously, if the knight moves, we have queen takes d1, and if white tries to protect the knight with, say, queen b8, we have knight e3 check. The knight cannot be captured because of the pin. There's also a king and rook fork, but we're actually going for mate. So there's a couple of moves here. If king h3, we have queen f5 check, king h4, and there's 3 different ways to mate. Probably the prettiest is knight g2 checkmate. If white tries king g1, we have queen f2 check, king h1, queen g2 checkmate. And finally, if white tries king h1, we have queen e4 check, f3, queen takes f3, king g1, queen g2 checkmate. So that's why Tal did not take the a2 pawn. Let's take a look at what he did play. Knight d3, attacking the rook. Rook c2, being up material and therefore looking to exchange pieces. Queen e4, rook c4. Anand could have played rook takes d2, and that would have been winning, but it would have taken some work to convert that advantage. This rook c4 move is more decisive. Queen d5, queen c3, rook b2, rook d4, rook b7 check, king h6, queen b6, attempting to hold on to the d3 knight, but there's a tactic in this position. Pause the video if you want to try and find it. Okay, the move is knight e3 check. Tal played king g1, but let's look at what happens if Tal takes f takes e3. So f takes e3, queen c2 check, king g1, queen takes d1, knight e1, queen takes e1, king g2, queen f2 check, king d2 check works just as effectively. Here, if king h1, we have rook d1 check followed by mate. King h3, rook h4 check. So king takes h4, queen takes h2 check, king h4, queen h5 checkmate. So some other moves white can try in this position, king h1, but this leads to the same position we looked at after queen takes d1, knight to e1, queen takes e1 check, king g2, queen f2, and this is the same exact position we just looked at. If king h3, we have rook h4 check, sacrificing the rook, king takes h4, queen h2 check, king h4, queen h5 checkmate. And if we go back, if in this position white plays g takes h4, we have rook f3 check, king g4, queen g2 checkmate. Now let's go back and look at what was actually played. King g1. Anand played queen c2, attacking the rook, and if the rook moves off the d file, the d3 knight will fall. Rook f1, rook takes d3, and here Tal resigned. Anand wins the game very much in Tal's own style. If Tal tries f takes e3, we have rook takes f1 check, king takes f1, rook d1 checkmate. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next video.